Her words cut through my chest like a cold blade. The best gift would be if you just died. The words echoed through the banquet hall at the exact moment I was raising my glass to thank everyone for coming. It was the night of my 65th birthday, and I had organized everything with such care. White flowers on the tables, soft piano music in the background, food where I remembered every detail of the menu. I had insisted on celebrating life, but my own daughter turned the party into a premature funeral. People around us exchanged glances. Some let out nervous little laughs, others lowered their heads, pretending they hadn't heard. The waiter passing with his tray stopped mid-stride, as if he had stumbled over the heavy silence that formed. I remained standing, motionless, my hand trembling, the champagne nearly overflowing. Clara, my daughter, was smiling. Not a smile of affection, but of victory, like someone who finally managed to say out loud what they had always wished in their heart. I felt my face burn, but I didn't allow a single tear to escape. The silence, so often used against me throughout my life, became my refuge. I thought of all the times I swallowed veiled comments from colleagues, neighbors, and even relatives. "You're too strong, Helena. It seems like you don't feel anything." Little did they know how much each word accumulated inside me like stones. Now, in front of everyone, I was the target of the most intimate humiliation, coming from the one I had carried in my womb, fed, educated, and defended against the world. The entire hall smelled of expensive flowers, but to me it had the sour odor of betrayal. I slowly set the glass down on the table. I didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't make a scene. Silence was my response, and that silence, as heavy as the cold marble of the columns around us, made Clara press her lips together. She expected me to lose control. But I only stared at her in silence, until she was the one who looked away. In that instant, I understood something that would change everything. The poison of those words wasn't just contempt. It was a warning. A cruel message that, to my daughter, I was nothing more than an obstacle to be eliminated. And it was there, among crystal glasses and embarrassed laughter, that the spark of my plan was born. My name is Helena, and if someone asked me who I am in a few words, I would say, a woman who learned to transform silence into resistance. I grew up in a small working-class home, daughter of a washerwoman and cook who never had rest. I learned early that the world has doors that open for some and locks that never open for others. I worked as a teacher, taught classes until my voice was tired, and saved every penny like someone preserving seeds for a future I promised my daughter. It wasn't easy. Being black and poor in a neighborhood divided by invisible codes meant hearing subtly that we didn't fit with certain events, seeing looks that measured my presence as if I were a decoration out of place. I responded with work, with presence, with the determination of someone who knows that education is leverage. I invested in Clara's career, paid for courses, bought books that I never forget to read before sleeping, and traded my nights of rest for extra shifts to help her with tests, interviews, everything. When she graduated, I cried as if the rain had entered my chest. Each of her achievements seemed to be also a piece of my own liberation. But with time I noticed subtle changes, a different tone in her voice when introducing me to friends, comments that seemed like compliments but carried an implicit comparison. "She's so hardworking, my mother worked so much." It was like praising an antique relic in a display case, beautiful from the right distance. And there was her husband, always so correct he seemed calibrated to correct my posture. Small advice that came with condescension. "Helena, let me explain that better for you," he would say, as if I hadn't educated thousands of children in the classroom. These microaggressions seemed like dust particles in suspension, almost invisible individually, but when they came together, they formed a suffocating fog. I came to believe that my role was to continue smiling, being a doting grandmother, a discreet presence, a role comfortable for others, invisible to me. And then came the phrase at my birthday, like a clear splinter that revealed what had always been behind the rehearsed smiles. To Clara, my existence had become an obstacle. I don't write this with total surprise. I write with a mixture of hurt and clarity. Because behind my daughter's cruelty were practical choices, bills, signatures, papers that I had entrusted to someone I loved. And something happened that woke me up. During an afternoon, while reorganizing old folders, I found a receipt for a payment I didn't recognize, a signature that wasn't mine, a contract with terms we had never discussed. My heart beat strangely, that vertigo sensation that comes before realizing that something that always sustained you had been corroded from within. It was there that I decided to stop being just a spectator of my own life. I didn't start by screaming, nor was I impetuous. I learned in life schools that sharpened patience is an underestimated weapon. I breathed, wrote down names, dates, kept copies. And before the feeling of loss could consume me, I wrote a plan, not to destroy but to expose, not out of hatred but for justice. If you feel that you've been reduced, made invisible, or betrayed by those who should protect you, come with me in this story. Subscribe to follow how far dignity can take us when we decide to reclaim it. And then, when filing those folders again, I noticed an envelope that hadn't been there before, with my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside there was something that would change the course of everything. It was a muggy Sunday afternoon when I saw my daughter arrive home for the usual family lunch. The smell of seasoning still filled the kitchen when I noticed the way she looked around, like someone inspecting property that already belonged to her. Clara didn't comment on my beans or ask how I was. She just mentioned casually, "This house is too big for you alone, Mom. You should think about passing it on soon." Her husband, sitting at the table, completed with a rehearsed smile, "It would be more practical for everyone." I swallowed hard. In that moment, I remembered the envelope I had found days before. Inside was a copy of a contract regarding a clinic Clara planned to open. But the detail that tore me apart was seeing my name included as guarantor for an enormous loan. The signature wasn't mine, although it was my handwriting forged in a crude way. Blood froze in my veins, but I disguised it, serving the rice as if nothing had happened. The cracks began to open there. Each gesture of hers carried a sting of calculation. Each phrase seemed rehearsed to diminish me. When a neighbor commented in a friendly tone that I was very generous for maintaining my daughter in such a high standard of living, Clara just laughed without even denying it. And it was in that laugh that I perceived the shadow of contempt. She didn't need to thank me, I never demanded that. But the laugh, cold, was like confirming that I was no longer a mother, but just the silent bank that sustained her ambitions. That night, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. I went to the slightly open door of the room and heard Clara whispering with her husband, "As soon as she transfers the inheritance part, we won't need to pretend anymore." The words came with the clarity of a blade cutting through air. My legs weakened, but I didn't allow the floorboard to creak. I held onto the doorknob and remained motionless, breathing slowly until they fell silent. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. Anger throbbed under my skin, but there was also a strange calm. It wasn't total surprise. The crumbs of indifference, the sharp phrases, the averted glances, everything pointed to that moment. Only now I was certain. It wasn't just ingratitude, it was a plan. I picked up the envelope again and stared at the forgery. The stroke was firm, but not enough to fool a mother who knows every curve of her own handwriting. There was the proof that Clara and her husband had decided to erase me while alive. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I knew I needed much more than indignation. I needed patience, cunning, and silence. Because in that instant I understood that the game had begun, and I would no longer be the discarded piece. And it was then that an almost imperceptible detail, hidden in the contract, revealed to me that there was something even bigger behind that betrayal. The next morning, I returned to examine the contract with the calm of a teacher grading papers. Every line, every comma. It was then that I noticed the hidden clause. If I died, all my share of the assets would be automatically transferred to Clara and her husband. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just forgery. It was a trap planned so that my absence would be convenient. For the first time I felt real fear. I walked through the house and noticed that even the objects seemed to be watching me. The photo of Clara's graduation, where we smiled holding hands, the table I bought with the sweat of 2 jobs, the plants I watered daily. Everything now tasted like threat. In the following days, I observed my daughter with new eyes. She always came elegant, expensive perfume, laughter too loud. But behind the shine, There was a look that no longer belonged to me. A look that didn't seek affection, only opportunity. The husband, in turn, made a point of positioning himself as the guide of the situation. He corrected my speech in front of others, laughed at my simpler expressions, as if I were a folkloric relic. "Your mother is so authentic," he would say to visitors, and everyone laughed in a forced way. I felt the weight of each microaggression, like small invisible cuts that skinned me inside. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my old document cabinet. I took out dusty boxes and began to assemble a chronology. Old receipts, transfer receipts, records of phone conversations. The more I gathered, the clearer it became. They had been setting up this plan for years, piece by piece, waiting for the moment when I would become vulnerable. But vulnerable didn't mean defeated. There, among yellowed papers and notes scribbled in haste, the certainty was born. I wouldn't let them bury me alive. I began to note every suspicious word, every movement. I secretly recorded conversations, photographed contract pages, kept copies on different flash drives. The silence, which before was a burden, now was my armor. But what surprised me most was what I found in one of the old folders. A printed email exchanged between Clara and her husband where she said, "She won't last much longer, and when she's gone we can finally breathe." My heart didn't beat faster. Quieted. Because in that instant I understood. My revenge wouldn't just be a response, but a spectacle they would never forget. And the perfect stage would begin to unfold before me when an unexpected invitation arrived. The inauguration of Clara's clinic. The invitation arrived in an elegant envelope, with golden letters and imported perfume. "Inauguration of Vitali's clinic. A dream realized," said the cover. Clara had sent it to me like someone fulfilling protocol, not as a daughter who desires her mother's presence. Below, in smaller letters, was the phrase that made me smile alone. "With fundamental family support." I knew what it meant. It was the polite way of saying that my forged signature, my diverted savings, and my years of work sustained that dream that wasn't mine. But the detail Clara didn't notice was that that event would be exactly the stage I needed. On Sunday, I wore my best navy blue outfit, arranged my hair carefully, and put on discreet but firm lipstick. I wouldn't go as an invisible spectator, but as a striking presence. Upon arriving, I noticed glances crossing, some whispering, "Is that her mother?" Always with that curious tone that carries the weight of racial comparison. One lady commented quietly to another, "She doesn't look anything like her daughter, does she? Must take after the father." I swallowed the bitter laugh and continued forward, without letting them see me shaken. The clinic sparkled. Glass panels, clear lighting, reception perfumed with expensive flowers. Clara and her husband posed for photos, dressed like magazine characters. She saw me entering and, for a second, her expression wavered. Soon she recomposed her smile and came to greet me with 2 cold kisses, barely touching. "Mom, how good that you came. Make yourself comfortable." I felt in the undertones. "Stay quiet." During the cocktail, I noticed local journalists taking photos, small-time politicians circulating, neighbors whispering about this successful enterprise. Clara went up to the improvised stage and began her speech. She talked about effort, about meritocracy, about the essential support of dear people. She never mentioned my name. But while she spoke, I felt my phone vibrate in my purse. It was a short message from the lawyer I had secretly hired. "Everything ready. Say the word." My heart beat firmly, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. Every document, every recording, every proof of forgery was in the right hands. I looked at Clara, who was smiling for the photographers, and noticed the irony. She believed that was the most important day of her life. Little did she know it would be the beginning of her ruin. I rose slowly, walking to the front, where everyone could see me. The sound of heels echoed on the marble floor, drawing attention. And when they offered me the microphone to give thanks, I noticed that the entire hall awaited my old silence. But this time I wasn't willing to be quiet. I held the microphone firmly. The palm of my hand was warm, but my voice came out clear without tremor. "Good evening, everyone. I am Helena, mother of Dr. Clara." The hall fell silent. Some surprised looks turned to me, as if they didn't expect me to be part of that night's narrative. Clara behind me was still smiling, but the shine in her eyes began to fade. I breathed deeply and continued. "Today my daughter inaugurates this clinic called Here a Dream. But true dreams aren't built on lies." Murmurs began to spread. I saw journalists adjusting cameras, neighbors leaning forward, curious. I opened the folder I carried. The lights reflected on the plastic sleeves that held each piece of evidence. I took out a sheet and raised it for everyone to see. "This contract, which bears my name as guarantor, was signed without my consent. The signature is forged." A buzz crossed the environment like sudden wind. Clara advanced a step, trying to grab the paper, but I stepped back calmly. "Not only that," I continued, and my voice echoed even louder through the microphone, "but I have recordings here where Clara and her husband discuss my death as a solution to accelerate their plans." Absolute silence fell over the hall. The husband coughed nervously. Clara turned pale. I looked around. I saw the shocked faces. Her professional colleagues, neighbors who always praised her, acquaintances who had her as an example of dedication. Everyone now watched the mask fall in real time. I opened another document and placed it in front of the nearest journalist. "Copies have already been forwarded to the district attorney's office and the press. Today is not just the inauguration of a clinic. Today is the unveiling of truth." Clara, trembling, tried to smile. "Mom, this isn't the place for..." But the sentence died in her mouth when one of the reporters asked, "Can you play the recording for us to hear?" I put my phone to the microphone and Clara's voice echoed through the hall. "As soon as she transfers the inheritance part, we won't need to pretend anymore." The sound was like thunder in a closed space. People put their hands to their mouths. Others stepped back, as if they were witnessing a crime about to explode. Clara sobbed a denial. The husband dropped his wine glass on the floor, and I remained firm, standing, facing each one of them. And in that instant, I understood that what I had prepared wasn't just silent revenge, but a public spectacle, and that their downfall was just beginning to unfold. In the week that followed that night, the streets seemed to walk around me with slower steps, as if the world was absorbing the news gradually. Local newspapers made headlines on their pages. Neighbors passed by the front door with expressions ranging from shock to curiosity. Clara disappeared for days. The husband, who had smiled in the photos before, avoided any contact. But I didn't let myself be carried away by the sensation of empty victory. I won the first battle, not the war of my own conscience. I went to the registry office and the bank. I took certified copies of the forged signatures, the recordings, the emails that exposed cruel intentions. I delivered everything to the lawyer I had discreetly hired, the one who spoke with firmness and care, like someone holding a dangerous key. I made the formal complaint and followed each paper. Protocols, case numbers, situations ranging from administrative to criminal. The sensation of seeing everything written with authority brought an almost physical relief. It was the materialization of justice, not just public humiliation. Meanwhile, social media, merciless, turned the story inside out. Old friends wrote messages of support. Others, those who had previously ignored me at family lunches, now commented on news and sent me surprise emojis. There was a strangeness in all this, being seen not for who I was in silence, but for who I became when I decided not to be quiet. Clara appeared at my house on the morning I was signing the last papers. She came without makeup, with swollen eyes, trembling lips. There was the haste of someone seeking shelter and, at the same time, the awareness that everything she was asking for, forgiveness, acceptance, money, had been conquered by means that hurt me. She entered and looked around, like someone refusing their own past. "Mom," she began, and for the first time in many years I heard her call me without hypocrisy, just with need. I was wrong. I never wanted. But the words fell before they could firm up. I could have undone everything. Forgive, transfer, resume what I had planned for the future. Many advised me to resolve within the family, to love above all. But there was something bigger at stake than my momentary comfort. I realized that accepting would allow other women, other grandmothers, other black women who sacrifice themselves to continue being invisible, their sweat delivering victories that would serve as facades for predators of affection and ambition. I then decided to do something that burned inside and healed at the same time. I definitively canceled the transfer of resources that had been prepared. Instead of reverting to Clara, I destined part of the amount to a scholarship fund for young black people from my community. Boys and girls who studied in public schools, who had dreams and little help to achieve them. The rest I put in a protected fund, so it couldn't be manipulated by those who confuse love with property. When I publicly announced the decision, the reactions were varied. Shock, applause, murmurs of disapproval. I saw familiar faces, many of whom had made ironic comments about my appearance over the years, now bow in respect. The girls from the community hugged me the day I delivered the first scholarship. It was their shining eyes that sealed, for me, true justice. It wasn't the humiliation of others I wanted. It was to repair, share, and plant future. Clara came to me one more time, almost on her knees, asking for forgiveness. There was repentance, certainly. There was also the weight of her exposed choices. I looked at her and said calmly, "Kindness is not synonymous with weakness. Silence is not consent." Her tears and pleas sounded like late learning, a lesson I had already taught with my life, and that now she needed to accept with public humility, not private promises in hallways. The sensation after everything was strange. It's not the cold pleasure of revenge, but the lightness of someone who decides to transform betrayal into collective justice. There are still ongoing processes. There are still people who prefer my silence instead of truth. But when I see the faces of young people who entered classrooms thanks to scholarships, when I hear a mother say that now her daughter will have a different chance, I remember that my choice was much bigger than a money refund. It was to reclaim dignity and rewrite what it means to be family. And while Clara tries, timidly, to rebuild something that was previously based on privilege obtained over my name, I continue living with the tranquility of someone who knew how to choose between erasing and illuminating. The last word I said to my daughter that afternoon hung in the air, simple and impossible to reverse. I gave you life, not obligation. The rest you will learn from your choices. Today, when I walk down the street and hear someone whisper my name, I no longer feel the shame I felt before. There's a new respect in the air, perhaps born from scandal, perhaps from example. But for me, the origin doesn't matter. What matters is that, finally, I stopped being the silent shadow that served only as support. The house, previously marked by the steps of people who diminished me, became my refuge again. The plants I water bloom again, as if they felt that the environment had stopped being contaminated. The photographs on the walls are still there, not as bitter memories, but as landmarks of what I survived. Reflecting, I understood that my revenge wasn't just exposing Clara and her husband in front of everyone. It was proving that dignity can't be bought, can't be forged, can't be inherited. It's conquered with choices. My daughter tried to transform me into an obstacle, but ended up giving me back my voice. And I confess, there were nights when I cried alone, asking if I had exaggerated, if I should have forgiven. But it was enough to remember the moment when I heard my own daughter wish for my death to feel clarity again. Forgiveness is not a license to continue hurting. True compassion is in interrupting the cycle, in showing that kindness is not being a doormat, that silence is not being an accomplice. Many women my age live similar stories, being called dead weight, ridiculed by their children, used as ladders for others' achievements. To them I leave this testimony. Don't underestimate your strength. Be patient, observe, collect evidence, and when the time comes, speak. Because speaking when truth is on your side is doing justice not just for yourself but for everyone. Today, Clara avoids me in public, but still tries in silence to seek a glimmer of forgiveness. Maybe one day I'll be able to look at her without feeling the scar throb. But until then I remain firm. The patrimony she tried to steal became seed for young black people who now study medicine, law, arts. My life, which she wanted to see ended, multiplied into futures. And it's with this certainty that I close my story. Not with resentment but with victory. Victory of the mature woman many called weak. Victory of the mother who was rejected, but not destroyed. Victory of the black woman who endured silence, but knew how to transform it into public cry. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and follow other voices like mine. Because what I lived is not just revenge. It's proof that no betrayal is capable of burying someone who has the courage to rise. And when I think about everything that happened, I realize that my life could have followed another path. The path of eternal silence, of complicity. I could have let Clara and her husband benefit from my years of work, could have accepted ingratitude as destiny. But I didn't. I chose to confront, chose to expose, chose to transform. In that illuminated hall, in front of cameras and witnesses, it wasn't just me who was rising. It was all the mothers who were once called burdens, all the mature women who were discarded as if they no longer had value, all the black women who carried generations on their backs without ever being seen completely. My voice echoed for them too. And deep down, the true victory wasn't canceling the funds, or even seeing the despair stamped on Clara's face when her mask fell. The true victory was recovering my own identity. Understanding that I'm not just the sacrificed mother, the widow who works in silence, the shadow that others mold according to their ambitions. I am Helena, whole, strong, and owner of my story. Looking back, I see that Clara confused my love with weakness, confused my silence with submission, and the whole world confused my kindness with blindness. But the truth is that each of my gestures was a choice. I chose to wait, observe, gather evidence. I chose the right moment to speak. I chose not to destroy just for the sake of destroying, but to transform pain into something greater. Today, the clinic that should have been a symbol of Clara's rise is remembered as the stage of her fall. And my name, which she wanted to erase, is engraved on the pages of lawsuits, in news reports, in the conversations of those who still comment on the night when a mother undid, with a folder of documents, years of lies. And so I conclude, with the certainty that kindness is not weakness, it's contained power. That silence is not acceptance, it's preparation. That revenge is not hatred, it's justice when dignity is denied. And to you who hear me now, I leave my invitation, subscribe. Because there are still many stories of women like me, invisible to some, but immense when they decide to rise. And remember, they can try to bury us, but they forget that we are seeds. After that night I was never the same again. And, in a certain way, thanks to that, I returned to being myself. I spent decades being seen only as Clara's mother, as if my existence was reduced to serving as a stepping stone. When I decided to break the silence, I realized that inside me there was still an intact flame, waiting only for the courage to ignite the lies that surrounded me. The community didn't let me forget. Many women came to me discreetly at the market or at church to whisper, "Helena, you spoke for us." Some cried while telling me they had also been humiliated by their own children or erased by daughters-in-law who treated them as nuisances. I hugged each one because I understood that my story, although painful, had transformed into a lighthouse. And I myself learned something. Blood doesn't guarantee bonds, motherhood doesn't guarantee respect. What sustains a family is truth and gratitude. Without that, only empty walls remain. Clara looked for me more times, always between tears and apologies. But I was no longer the woman who accepted emotional crumbs. I listened in silence, with the serenity of someone who knows that time, not pity, should teach. I transformed my pain into action. The scholarship fund I created has already financed the studies of young people who, like me, once heard that they didn't fit in certain places. Today, I see one of them enter medical school and think, the money that would have been used to feed greed became a future for those who truly believe in the value of life. This is my true heritage. And when I walk through the neighborhood, raising my face, I no longer carry the sensation of being invisible. I carry the certainty that I survived the cruelest ingratitude and, even so, chose to rise higher than ever. The revenge I prepared wasn't just against Clara and her husband. It was against a lifetime of microaggressions, of crossed looks, of attempts to reduce me. And what keeps me standing is knowing that I won, not with violence, but with truth exposed under public light. If you who hear me now have ever felt that your voice was suffocated or that your kindness was confused with weakness, remember my story. Reclaim your dignity. Because when truth arrives, no mask can resist. And that's why I say, subscribe. Because there are many other stories of women like me. And each one is a seed ready to flourish where they said it could never grow.